Yeah,
Or
so
do you
so I
think
think
people would flow
initially
to
the
it?
panic, right? It's kind of like a rising tide lifts all boats, or the opposite occurs when when you see panic, people, and we saw this by the way in the COVID March 2020 collapse, gold
Yep.
collapsed, Bitcoin collapsed, the stock. I mean, people were so panicked that everything kind of fell. So I think initially you would see that, and then very quickly that would be a buying opportunity for something like a Bitcoin. So I would just look at it as like, if you have the view like I do that long term Bitcoin is amazing, then I do think you use it as a buying opportunity. And the other thing I'd like to point out is that I know we're kind of dealing with, is there going to be regulation? What type of regulation? Is it going to be bad regulation? I would like to make the point that I hear a lot more of the politicians getting involved with
Oh
Bitcoin
yeah.
and buying it as an investment. And like,
Yep.
this is what's crazy is they're involved with the dollar and what's going on in the spending in the government. And therefore they almost know deep down that the dollar's long term in trouble, and they're
Yep.
diversifying with Bitcoin. So they're not gonna. They actually want Bitcoin to survive and thrive when they have investments in it. So I'm all for it. Like I think they'll be fine. I think the Bitcoin regulation or overall will be fine.
Hello and welcome to Money Talks. In today's video, Chief Market Strategist at InTheMoneyStocks.com, Gareth Soloway, updates about the most recent price run of Bitcoin, Ethereum, and other cryptocurrencies. He also reveals what will happen if the economy of Europe and China crumbles and its impact on the US dollar. Also, a huge upgrade to Ethereum 2.0 is coming soon. The ETH merge will almost certainly make the cryptocurrency markets even more volatile. So, does it make sense to buy more Bitcoin or Ethereum as we drop before the merge? If you like the video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the post notifications. So, without wasting any time, let's dive right into the video.
Yeah, I think for me, at least when it comes to Bitcoin, I think that Bitcoin still has a small chance to make one more push up. It almost seems too easy, and I'm a kind of a contrarian trader
Yep.
where we've broken down the Bitcoin chart never really had a big spike that got everyone on board on the bullish side. A lot of people were bullish, but not to the extent that usually signals a reversal in trend. So I am kind of curious if we see that, and I agree. I mean, if you look at Bitcoin's price today, it's only down a little bit. In fact, the equity markets are down percentage-wise more than Bitcoin, which is somewhat on the rarer side, especially when the dollar is as strong as it is. So I don't know if we can look at that right now and say, oh, that's actually a strong indicator for Bitcoin, but it very well could signal maybe a little bit of upside still left in Bitcoin's tank before it finally rolls over. So I think it's important to understand, I'm not debating whether or not Bitcoin's going to go lower. I do believe it does. The question is when. And that's going
Yeah.
to be key here. Do we get one more push up, retest 25, maybe get to 28, or is it done now and just kind of going to that 12 to 13,000 range?
Bitcoin sold off mildly in trading, declining 1.8% on average trading volume. The largest cryptocurrency by market capitalization rose 3% over the weekend and has settled in near the $21,000 mark after plunging last week. Ether, the second largest cryptocurrency by market capitalization, was recently down 2%, following an increase of 0.58% over the weekend. All eyes appear focused on global macroeconomic developments and the impact that both growth and inflation will have on crypto assets. Investors will be listening to comments by Fed Chair Jerome Powell during the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City's Economic Policy Symposium in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, later this week for hints of what the central bank will do at its September meeting.
Yeah, so I think number one, the Fed minutes that came out last week, the market was a little shocked the Fed wasn't more dovish. They seemed very hawkish, and that's really where we topped out in the equity market. So we've seen that pull back now. We've two pretty big sharp down days, Friday and today. And now the question is, again, where do we go? So I think for Bitcoin itself, Bitcoin is kind of trying to figure that out as well. And in fact, we can go to the Bitcoin chart here. Let me bring that up so we can take a look. But basically, we broke down below this channel. So this was a bearish kind of channel, perfectly parallel lower line and upper line. And you can see on Friday when we had the big market sell-off, it did break. So that's a little bit of a concern. It's not the end-all be-all, though, because you're still holding above the 2017 highs. So this is going to be a big test now for Bitcoin. Does Bitcoin come down? Does it tag it and bounce? or do we start to break lower? And again, for that, you have to look at the DXY, the dollar. I think the dollar is hugely important here. The dollar has been screaming to the upside. I do have it penciled in that we have a nice double top here, so I expect a pullback in the dollar, and that may save Bitcoin in the near term.
The symposium, which begins Friday, is expected to provide insight into the pace at which Powell expects the Federal Open Market Committee to increase rates for the remainder of the year. According to the CME FedWatch tool, the probability of a 70 basis point interest rate increase has risen to 54.5% from 47% one day prior.
Yeah, so I think the CPI will continue to move a little bit lower or will grind a little bit lower. I think, again, you're seeing how the producer price index side was the leading indicator for the consumer prices, right? So we saw very early on that the producers, the people that manufacture, the companies that manufacture, their inflation was starting to kind of come down a little bit. That should get passed to the consumer a little bit as well. My biggest fear, and I think we talked about this a couple weeks ago, is that I think everyone's expecting it to go to 2% or below, like the Fed says. I don't think it does that, and I think that's your big issue later in the year. So later in the year, early 2023, the market starts to realize that inflation's stuck at 4 or 5% per year. And when we get to a point, whether it's this year, the next year, the year after that, when you have a recession, we know that recessions are inevitable. How does the Fed get us out of that this time when they can't print money? And that's the scary thing. And I think that's where, whatever that is, that's where you see the bottom in Bitcoin, where Bitcoin finally starts to turn back up and say, okay, now we have a new scenario. The Fed's not bailing us out. Inflation's not coming down. Buy something like a Bitcoin, continue to accumulate gold.
In global economic news, Hong Kong's annual inflation rate for July increased to 1.9% from 1.8% the previous month, but below consensus estimates of 2%. Traditional markets sold off as well, with the Dow Jones Industrial Average, S&P 500, and tech-savvy NASDAQ composite falling 1.9%, 2.1%, and 2.6% respectively.
Yeah, so I think the key is understanding for everyone watching that if the world crumbles, meaning that if China crumbles because their real estate market's crumbling, if Europe crumbles because of natural gas and Russia, basically what's going on is people will flood into the dollar. So my thinking is that people are over anticipating that. And my guess is, number one, we've heard that China's already cutting interest rates multiple times. They're stimulating their economy. My guess is, again, we're going to see natural gas. I have a key level on natural gas that shows it's likely going to top out. And so I think people are actually over anticipating these events. And when it comes and when it doesn't come to fruition, that's going to be also a trigger for the dollar. In fact, let me bring up the natural gas chart. I want to show you this.
You're kind of saying this might be priced in.
Yeah, I think it is. I honestly think it is. And in fact, if we look at the natural gas chart, there's this from early 20 or late 2021. Look at this channel and how every time we hit the upper line, it sells off. And look at this. I mean, this was an epic sell-off, but look at how close we are to hitting that again. In fact, that's, for me, I'm going to look to short that on natural gas. I will be pulling the trigger on a short on natural gas, obviously proper allocation in my portfolio.
Recent chart shows Bitcoin's decline into oversold territory on multiple indicators. Bitcoin's RSI fell below 30 during Friday's 10% price drop, recovering since then to 34. RSI is a technical indicator that measures price momentum. Readings above 70 traditionally indicate that an asset is overbought, while readings at 30 or below imply that an asset is oversold. As markets await the Fed Chair Powell's symposium comments on Friday, Bitcoin will likely trade relatively flat on lower volume in the coming days.
Yeah, so Ethereum is one of the trickier charts for me to analyze, mainly because of the curveball of the merge and how that affects price. I'm a true believer that the reason Ethereum has rallied, I mean, if you look at the rally, it was up over 100% off of the lows. My guess is a chunk of that gain was due to the excitement of the merge. My fear is that it's going to be a sell the news event. It's going to happen. Yes, it's a good thing for Ethereum, but I don't necessarily know if it's a short-term continued catalyst. So my guess is I think you could get some bounces here, but I wouldn't be surprised if you have to go at least retest 1250 down here, which would be major support before it has a chance to kind of withstand the selling pressure that the U.S. markets are likely to exude. So I'm in that camp where I still think there's a little bit more downside. I still think Bitcoin has further downside, and therefore by default probably Ethereum. The question for me is, has Ethereum put in its longer term low already? Which again, I'm a little bit murky on.
Bitcoin's so-called Bollinger Bands also imply that Bitcoin is currently undervalued. Bollinger Bands measure the moving average for an asset, typically 20 days, and calculate values that are 2 standard deviations above and below the moving average. Traders often view movements outside of 2 standard deviations as a sign that prices have risen abnormally high or low, and identify this signal when Bitcoin prices move outside the Bollinger Bands. Bitcoin's current chart indicates that prices have reached the lower range of their Bollinger Bands, implying that price is oversold.
Yeah, so for me, I'd have to wait. Anytime something rallies as much as the Ethereum chart has rallied, I would be too scared or too nervous to jump in at this minor of a pullback. I mean, we're basically down, 30% or so off of those highs maybe, but it's not a huge correction. Usually what you'll see is after you have such a big bear market drop in Ethereum, and again, if we go back, this was trading near 5,000, it went to 875 or so before this bounce back. Usually you'll get a check back. So my line in the sand for me would be this little pivot right down here. You can see it's a 2 kind of pivot top right there and right there. And that would be your spot where if you flushed into it around 1260, 1250, that would be where a short-term long could be initiated for a bounce, a pretty significant bounce back up.
So what do you think will happen if the economy of Europe and China crumbles? Tell us in the comments. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. See you soon with the next video. Thank you so much for watching.